Let's get a read of what we could look forward to there for the Republican Senate Finance Committee Chair, Chuck Grassley, who joins us right now. Senator, very good to have you. Thank you for coming.
Glad to be with you, Neil.
What does your gut say on how long it could last if it gets to the Senate, sir? Already Chuck Schumer's demanding witnesses. He wants to speak to Mick Mulvaney, the chief of staff, wants to speak to John Bolton, a host of others. Where do you think this goes?
I don't think that there will be any decision on bringing people in for questioning until after we've had the opening statements by the prosecutors coming from the House of Representatives and by the president's response to that, his lawyers responding to that. And then at that point, there might be some debate of that. But I think that the idea is not to prolong this, to give a fair trial and reach a decision based upon well thought out testimony for and against the president, but not to make it any longer than necessary, because the Senate has a lot of work to do, and we want to get to that work.
As you know, the president seems to be slightly at odds with Mitch McConnell about how long and involved this should get. Obviously, Mitch McConnell pretty much sharing your views, sir, saying, you know, let's wrap this up fairly quickly. The president sees this as an opportunity to get witnesses, maybe himself speaking. You don't think that would be a good idea?
I think I'm going to leave that to our caucus to decide, but if you were asking me, I think the fact that they haven't found anything that the Constitution says people ought to be impeached for, treason, bribery, high crimes, and misdemeanors, in other words, unlike Nixon and unlike Clinton, violating, in both instances, violating federal law, that hasn't been charged against the president. So we ought to listen to what the House says and then get it over as quick as we can. On the other hand, we're not going to rush things either, as some people have suggested we ought to do, just dismiss it. That would be the wrong thing to do.
All right, you know, there has been concern as well about these trade deals. I know they matter a great deal to you, whether we're talking the USMCA, the one we have scored with the Mexicans and the Canadians, or the phase one, if you will, of the China deal, Senator. On the Mexican concern about that trade deal, they don't like the idea of U.S. inspectors there sort of monitoring them. It could be a deal breaker. What do you think of that?
Well, first of all, these people are not going to be inspectors the way the Mexicans make it sound out. Go into any factory they want to go into. That's not going to happen. They're there to monitor. And I think we don't raise questions about employees in our embassy department that are there to help commercial activity in Mexico. Why would you raise any questions about monitoring labor activities in Mexico? And we're going to have absolute respect for Mexican sovereignty and their business relations, and we are not going to do anything that violates the USMCA.
All right, so when the Mexicans complain about these monitors that they're kind of spying on them, you say they're not. So what are they doing, Senator?
Well, they're there to make sure that this, well, first of all, let's back up. There was a lot of accommodation made to the Democrats and to the unions to make sure that Mexico lived by their own labor laws. And I would say carrying out those compromises that were made at the last minute to get this through the House of Representatives, that we want to make sure that Mexico follows that. But it's going to be state to state. It's not going to be the American government interfering in Mexican business. So state to state, in other words, government to government, is the way all of these trade arrangements work. It's not going to be any different for Mexico. And by the way, Mexico's sending some people up here this very day to talk to Lighthizer, and when that meeting's over, I'm convinced in my own mind that Mexico is going to be satisfied.
All right, if I could switch to the China deal, sir. I mean, you get two different interpretations in our country that it was a win for the United States. The Chinese are much more quiet about that, obviously emphasizing the points that they think they scored well on. But do you expect the Chinese to honor their agreements? Because we still don't know, even as of now, what those agreements are, how much they're going to buy, obviously in farm-related items crucial to your fine state. Are you aware of a mechanism in place to make sure they do? Yeah,
and that mechanism is that American business is going to be able to, with problems they have, if China isn't living up to it, they're able to come to our special trade representative, and the special trade representative has consultative arrangements with Chinese to represent on a government-to-government basis that problem that American business is having with China not carrying out their promises. Let me add something here. It's going to be a little more difficult to measure whether or not they're living up to the arrangements that I just talked about. But when it comes to purchase of agricultural products of $40 to $50 billion in the next 2 years, we're going to be able to quantify whether or not they're living up to that.
And if they're not?
Well, if they aren't, then first of all, we can have, under this agreement, we can have tariffs reimposed. And even if we didn't have that arrangement in phase one, we could still do it anyway.
All right, we'll watch closely. Senator, I love this time of year as much for your red sweaters as anything else. So I wish you a Merry Christmas, Senator. Very good catching up with you.
It's a pretty good Merry Christmas for the president, getting 2 major trade agreements in one day announced last Friday. The president is a real leader in accomplishing what he said he was going to accomplish during the election.
All right, so you should give him a red sweater, I think. It's probably fitting. All right, Senator, always good seeing you. Thank you. Merry Christmas.